good afternoon, evening, good morning, wherever you're calling from. It's great to welcome you here today. My name's John, and I'm calling from Luton in the UK, where I work part-time in medicine and part-time for the Christian Medical Fellowship. And today we've got the pleasure of looking at this topic, developing volunteer leaders, some lessons along the way, but also very keen for us to have the opportunity to share with one another. And in the Q&A, it'd be great to have questions, but also I'd love to hear your perspectives as to the lessons that you've learned as well. I'm aware of the rich amount of experience that you all have. So we'll have some content. We're going to break out just on 2 occasions, just to have a chat with a couple of the people on the call and just to hear their perspectives as we go through this session. Again, just to say who I am. I don't really love resumes like this, but it just gives an idea of some of the things that I've done. So I work with the Christian Medical Fellowship. I used to do this student work solely, but now my work is a little bit more overseeing our leadership and training for students, but also for our doctors as well. Done some mission training, intended to be living overseas, but I'm not. I'm living in Luton, and the world comes to Luton. We're about 50% Pakistani population here, which is very interesting. And then I like doing leadership things. I'm involved in church leadership as well as in parachurch leadership. So why this topic? Why are we talking about developing volunteer leaders? Well, it would be good for you also in a moment just to pop in the chat and just reflect on what brings you here. What is it that has actually brought you to this seminar? What's triggered you to come? And I guess I've seen volunteering done very badly and seen volunteers led very badly. And that's what has really prompted me to think about this area. I've seen people given roles, maybe leading the children's work in church, or it might be one of our small groups in our Christian fellowship network of doctors and nurses. And I've seen they're given the role, and 10 years later, someone's still in the role feeling guilty that if they stop doing it, no one else would take over, that actually they feel very tied to the role. And I've got a children's leader at church. I won't go into too many details, trying to protect confidentiality, but has been doing the role for about 7 years. But actually, when asked, how does what she's doing link in with our church? How does it link in with the rest of our ministry? Does she have a vision for the children's work? How often does someone say, "How are you? How's it going?" The answer is fairly shocking, that actually never. No one's ever asked me how I'm doing. No one's ever shared with me how the children's work fits in with the vision of the church. And I've seen this all over the place. I spoke to a senior doctor just a few weeks ago in another organization, and he said, for 20 years I've been volunteering in this role and no one's asked me how I am. So I've seen this problem with burnout and with people in roles for a long time as volunteers, and also seeing frustration in church from leaders about volunteers. Very common to hear people in leadership say, "Oh, you can't trust volunteers. At least when paid staff, they'll do what you ask them to do." And I've also heard frustrations the other way from volunteer leaders about the church leadership. Oh, we're never involved, or we're never kept involved in decisions or invested in. First thing that I really want to say about volunteering is that it's all about a willing heart. All about a willing heart. Now, I have a fantastic student who was a student in South London. She was really keen. She had a real heart for the gospel work we're doing amongst medical students. She was always there at events. She would serve, she would cook. And gradually she took opportunities to take on a role, to do a talk. And then she ended up coming onto our team as a volunteer for a couple of days a week, working with students, and actually ultimately has come on to our team as a staff member. And she was very surprised at being asked, but we've seen wonderful growth as she's now been involved in our student ministries. And what was really interesting, right from the beginning, she really showed a willing heart, what I would call the heart of a volunteer. And oftentimes with volunteering, certainly if you're in the UK, you think of, it's actually a very negative word. So I don't know about you, I think of someone who potentially is a bit desperate. We need your help. Please come and help us. We need volunteers just to do some things for us. Or volunteers might be people who, like the lady on the right, as a volunteer, my job is to tell people where to go. I was born for this. And so sometimes people will give people a volunteer role because they think, well, they're too difficult to take on as staff. Let's just give them a job or something to do. I've heard many people actually talk about volunteers as unpaid labor. So we need to get more volunteers in because it's unpaid labor. We can't afford the staff, so let's just get volunteers. And I think what I want to start us off by doing is reframing the way that we think about volunteering. And I want to frame it in a very positive light. So Chuck Noll, who's an American coach, said this. He said, the mercenaries will always beat the draftees, but the volunteers will crush them both. The reason he said that is this. He said mercenaries are motivated by money. So people who are just come on board and they're just going to get paid, they will just do, we all know times when perhaps we've had that attitude, or people we've met have had that attitude. They're just doing it because of the money. Draftees are motivated by fear. They're told that they need to come on board and they need to work unless otherwise they're going to be in deep trouble. They'll receive a punishment. But volunteers are motivated by a heart and by a passion. And I believe in the heart of volunteering. I believe that when you get somebody who is going to volunteer, whether it's in your church or your ministry, there can be nothing more valuable sometimes than a motivated volunteer. I've mentioned Sarah from my organization. Perhaps you can think of somebody who you think, yeah, that person epitomizes, they show what it is like to be a volunteer. So think of that person, think what it is about them that you so appreciate. And I think biblically, volunteering, I see it as all about service. And I want to tie these words volunteering and willing together. We're not going to do a long exegesis here, but it's worth dipping into Exodus 35 and 36 when you can. We just see the words willing and service and all the people. We see it a number of times repeated. This is a privileged service, a willing giving to God of money and possessions for building the temple. We see the similar word used this time in Greek for a priestly sacrifice, a latreo. Romans 12, 1-3. This is what Paul speaks about with our whole lives to be living sacrifices. In Hebrews 13, he talks about our words and our actions being a latreo, a priestly sacrifice to God. And Philippians 4:18, the money that the church is sent, it's the money itself, the gift of generosity is a fragrant aroma, an acceptable latreo, act of service to God. So actually a heart of a volunteer is one that pours out to God in response to what he has done for us through the Lord Jesus Christ. We serve because Christ has served us. And that's the way I think about volunteering. I'm looking for opportunities for people to serve because of what Christ has done for them. And so therefore, we devalue the ministry and what we're doing if we're begging for people to join us, because instead what we're saying is, this is a privilege. It is a privilege for you to join the ministry. This is an opportunity for you to express back to God with thankfulness what he has done for you. I hope that makes sense. It's a privilege. It's an honor to be part of expressing that back to God. And therefore, whether we're paid staff or unpaid staff, we are all called to have the heart of a volunteer. And it sounds very simple, but this has really been quite foundational for us at the Christian Medical Fellowship, of having the heart of a volunteer, willing, sacrificial service to God in response to what he's done for us through Christ. That's how I define volunteering. We've talked about a willing heart, the heart of a volunteer. I think something else, and Jonathan's mentioned this already in the chat, about seeing volunteering as a discipleship opportunity, that actually it's about making disciples, not just about getting a job done. And this is a London bus. There's a few of these still around. And of course, at the front of a bus, there's a destination. There's a number and a destination, in this case, the lovely Barnet in North London. And I think our ministries all have a direction, don't they? Hopefully they have a direction. We have a vision. We want to get somewhere. We have a destination. We want to grow. We want to evangelize. We want to impact society. We want to make disciples. And at CMF, our destination, if you like, is to unite and to equip Christian doctors and nurses to live and speak for Jesus. That is our, what I call, external destination, where we're heading to. And I think I want us just to ask this question about external destinations versus internal destinations. So I've mentioned our external destination in our ministry. What are we looking to achieve? And it's always good to be able to write that down and to be able to speak to somebody about it very briefly. But we also have an internal destination, I believe, in what we want to do in people, in the people who work for us, who work with us. That we have a destination that we want to see them grow. We want to build ministry, but we're also here to build people and make disciples. And the joy of calling people to partner with us in the ministry is that we're calling them to join God in what he is doing by doing the works that he has prepared in advance for each of us to do. And I think that's a great privilege. Working with volunteers is a great privilege as we are building people as well as building organizations. And so some internal destinations, for example, of our volunteers, we want people to be transformed into the likeness of Christ. We want them to obey the great commandment, to love God and neighbor, and the great commission to go and make disciples. And there are different ways that we will do that as we train and disciple those who work with us. And linked to that is our stewardship. And this is, I think, really important because we talk a lot, certainly in the UK, about financial stewardship. That actually, when funds are mismanaged, there is a big outcry, there's an investigation. And when somebody is found to have embezzled funds or taken money or not used money correctly in our ministry, there's a big deal made out of it, and that's a good thing. But the question to us is, how do we respond to mismanaged people? We may respond to mismanaged funds, but how do we respond to mismanaged people? And I remember once someone saying to me, are you prepared in your ministry if you were given 5 million euros equivalent? What would you do with it? Are you prepared? How would you spend it? And someone said to me, well, maybe a reason why you're not getting money is how sure are you that you're going to steward that money well? Is that principle of stewardship, that what we're given, we want to steward well. But I've had people say to me before, well, I wish I had more volunteers. And I've asked them, well, what would you do with them? Like, what's your plan? And they've struggled to tell me. The question is raised, are we prepared if God was to give us some amazing volunteers to turn up? Are we going to steward them well? Are we going to look after them? Are we going to take seriously people stewardship, human stewardship, just as seriously as we take financial stewardship? And that's really been a big question for me to answer. And so I think the question I'll just leave hanging there with you is, do you in your ministry have an internal as well as an external destination? Do you have a plan to help people grow and develop? Are you stewarding your volunteers in the same way, with the same seriousness that you steward your finances? Gospel partnership. And really, this is just to say that volunteers are capable partners. It can be very tempting in ministry, and I've met so many who see that it's actually the leaders are doing the ministry. This is my ministry. Would you come and join me in my ministry? And this happened when I first joined CMF. The language that we used in our emails and our communications was, we're doing the ministry. Thank you for supporting us in our ministry at CMF. Would you like to give to what we're doing? Could you help me in putting on this conference that I'm doing, because this is what God has called me to do? Do you hear the language? Do you hear just how that can come across? Whereas actually, when we think about developing volunteers, I found it very powerful to be thinking of volunteers as capable partners, that actually this is the priesthood of all believers, not just some believers, that we serve God together. We're not just saying, come and help me, or in our churches saying, we desperately need help. We really need someone to come and fill this spot on the children's rota for our ministry. There can be a time to ask for help like that. But actually, we're calling people to get what we're doing, to serve together. volunteers are capable partners in the gospel. And that links really with point 4, which is to start with why. And this is a very secular application. Simon Sinek, of course, has written a book called Start With Why. I do believe in mining good secular things if we can, and seeing where we can get to. But again, this links to what I've just said. So often we hear this cry for help. Can you help? Or in my ministry, we desperately need board members. We're down to 10 board members, trustees, in other words, and we need 12. Please come and help us. Come and fill the gaps, okay? Maybe that resonates with you. I've been tempted as a leader to speak like that. But the reality is, and someone famous and eloquent said this, and I've nicked it, is that need minus vision equals desperation. When we state a need, but there's no vision there, we just come across as desperate. Whereas need plus vision equals inspiration. When we couple the need with the vision behind it, the why, there's inspiration there. And we want to help people to engage with the why. We want to help people to understand why they would give their time. I'm dealing with very busy doctors. Why would they come and be a trustee of CMF? Just because I'm asking them to, because I need them? Or actually because they sense that there's a bigger purpose, there's a vision behind it, both the external destination of what we're doing as an organization, but also that they might see it as part of what God is calling them to do, to use the gifts that he's given them, the experience he's given them, to uniquely contribute to the ministry. And that's wonderful. I often have the problem of people saying, well, how on earth do you get busy people to come and join you? And that question's come up already in the chat. Thanks for that. That how do we balance not overloading people, and particularly if we're dealing with people who are busy. And I'm very honest with people. Usually I say, look, I know you're busy. I'm not here to get you to do more meetings. I'm not here just to get you to fill in the gaps and just to tick the box so that we can carry on. Instead, what I'm asking you is God calling you to this at this particular time? What is it that you will need to say no to in order to say yes to serving with CMF? And I know many of us are very used to doing that kind of thing in our leadership, but it's just helping people walk through. We're not trying to add things to a busy schedule just to tick a box. This is about something deeper. This is about, is God stirring something in your heart for this period of time? And if someone says yes, and I never assume that they're going to say no. I always ask if in doubt, and give people the dignity of responding and answering themselves. So need plus vision equals inspiration. Another famous phrase, don't recruit to the task, recruit to the vision. And another way of saying this is this famous quote from Antoine de Saint-Exupéry. I think that's right. If any French speakers, you'll correct me. If you want to build a ship, don't drum up the men to gather wood, divide the work and give orders. Instead, teach them to yearn for the vast and endless sea. I hope that speaks for itself. I do like that quote. It's good to give people a picture of what we're trying to achieve and to accomplish. And I ask people to imagine in CMF, I say, look, imagine being involved in a group of people where we're seeing these things happen, where we're seeing churches equipped, for example, to speak into issues of health and well-being in our congregations. Imagine reaching more medical students with the gospel, discipling them to be leaders in the next generation. Imagine. And then our catalyst teams, which are our regional teams, saying that this is what we imagine seeing. We imagine seeing this multiplication of teams of medics and nurses in every region in the UK, allowing the Lord to bring transformation to the places where we live and where we work. Imagine there being a praying presence in every healthcare setting in the UK. How incredible would that be? Would you be part of it? Will you join us in being part of that vision? So leading with why. And then just before we go to a little breakout room, choosing with care. And I want to go back to our bus analogy, that red bus, if you remember it, or going to Barnet. the bus that represents our ministry, traveling to a destination. And the question I sometimes think to myself is this the right bus for this person to be on at this time in their life? And if so, which seat should they sit in? When I was young, I would always want to sit on the top seat of the double-decker bus at the front when I went into London. Very exciting. But which seat is the right place for them to be on? And I think something I found very helpful in thinking about where people fit in, and is this the right thing for them to be doing at the right time, is to first of all really listen to people and just spend time. And that as a leader, that means closing my mouth, doing less talking, which I love doing, and listening. Who are they? What's going on in their life at the moment? Where's God at work? And I love spending time with people who are exploring, who want to know a bit more about the ministry and whether they could be involved. And I think it's really important to give time. I think in pastoral ministry, of course, for those we're shepherding, it's so important to spend time with people. And it might be that this person who I think would be fantastic as a student leader in my ministry, it might be that at the end of the conversation, they say, actually, I don't think this is right for me. And I want to be a leader who is at the place where I say, I want to serve you. And I'm willing for you to say no. And it's worth it. It's worth it because it's a service to people. And it saves a lot of time and heartache later on when someone realizes that actually they were too busy to do this role. Or actually, this isn't the right role for their gift set. They should have been in the worship band and not out doing the youth group, for example. It saves a lot of time if we just do that at the beginning. And we use I just use this as a template. I don't actually ever fill this in by hand, I must admit, but we just think about a person's evidence of faith in their life, what their heart is, what ideas they've got, and then what could they commit to? What would they need to stop doing in order to do this, for example? Faith, heart, and commitment. So those are some of the things that I look for. And so I think the question, again, I'll leave you with just to take away, are we listening to people? Or are we too busy and preoccupied with our vision for the ministry that we're not actually listening to what people are saying and helping them? So that's a first step of choosing with care, is listening to people. And then I've actually mentioned this already, asking people. I think a lot of us are maybe in Britain, we're too nervous to ask people. We think, oh, they'll be too busy. They'll say no. They're doing other things. And I think I've always asked busy people, and it gives people dignity. We just don't know what God's doing in people. We don't know whether they're about to stop doing something. We don't know whether God's been stirring them about what you're doing. It's worth asking. And so that's a challenge for us. Do we ask people or do we write them off? And then very practically, and I think I'll leave the practical bit just for you to look at on the handout. I'm asking God constantly to lead me to people who are faithful, who are available, who are actually going to be there, who are self-motivated, who are ready to step up and to, they see this as something that's on their heart. They'd like to do it. They're teachable. They're ready to learn. They're ready to grow, and they're hungry. They're passionate to grow spiritually and personally. Now, let me be honest. I don't fulfill all of these all the time, and most people who come on as volunteers are not ticking every single box all the time. But this is just the sort of faith acronym I have, just going through as I'm saying, Lord, who is it that you're calling to this work, to partner with us? And we just look at some of these C's, I call them the 6 C's of which lots of people do in recruitment, of what's the calling of God on their life at this time. Why CMF? Why working with us, and why now? The reality of the Christian testimony in their life, their character, their chemistry with the team. Is this the right fit? Their competence, their skill at doing that role. It's important. And their communication, how they've communicated with me. So it's just some things that we use in our process. But I'd like you just to, maintaining confidentiality, consider a challenge that you faced with a volunteer. Can you trace that back to the choosing process? Has something gone wrong? Have you, on reflection, have you thought, well, actually, this wasn't quite the right thing for them to do? And could there be something that you could have done earlier to avoid that? I want to mention just investing in people, and particularly focusing on working through a few. And I think that investing in people is so important. It can be easily forgotten in volunteer ministry, as I've already alluded to. It can be very easy to think, well, people are going to do the work, and then we wonder why they're struggling, and we wonder why they're asking for help, or sometimes leaving altogether. Have volunteers like that, they just stop turning up, stop doing the role that they are in. And I've really found it helpful to place a big emphasis on investing in people. And we think of it in these terms. We think of investing in them in terms of their knowledge. So what do they need to know for the role? Are there any actual skills and things that they need to actually know to do the role? Might be some training on a computer program, something as simple as that. Their heart. So really investing in them spiritually. And that may look like, so with my team leaders, whenever I speak with them, I do spend time hearing about them, about their families, about where they are, about how they're doing in their walk with the Lord. And we spend most of our time on that before we actually talk about the ministry. Someone once said that's connecting before collecting. Actually connecting with people is so important as we do that. And it's very time intensive, but it's hugely valuable. And then skills. What skills are we giving them? And we do this in different ways in our ministry. I'm always thinking of where is a natural place to invest in people, and we do this through teams, through team meetings, opening scripture. We always build in equipping in any meeting that we have. We say here's an opportunity for us to learn together, and then of course one-to-one, just teaching and equipping people. We also have formal ways of doing this. So we do this through appraisals. And I thoroughly recommend, with our volunteers, we always time limit. So we say that you come on, this is a one-year role or a 2-year role. And that means that people have got permission. In fact, everyone has permission at the end of a year to say, how's it going? We're going to sit down. This is just what we do. It's our culture. We sit down and we talk with all of our children's leaders, with all of our student leaders, and we say, how's it going? And how can we do things better at CMF? And it's also a great opportunity to see how people have been faithful with what they've been given. And it might be that you see that they've been faithful and they might be able to take on more, or they might have to stop what they're doing. But it gives everybody that permission just to stop with those appraisals. And we also do online training and webinars and courses and so on. And a lot of our younger folk, particularly our students and our juniors, love learning. So a lot of them plug into our tracks and our programs that we run. And that's been a hugely valuable adjunct to them serving. I find that those who really engage with learning and receiving, if you like, are hugely able and willing to give as they've served and as they've benefited from that. So I mentioned about how we focus on equipping in teams, on resourcing from the central office, and then we also link them to others around the country who are doing similar roles in the ministry. And I'll just leave you with this really as we come to Q&A, multiplying through a few. It sounds like I've got lots and lots of people volunteering. Sometimes we are aware that we have lots of people in our congregation and we think, goodness, where do I start? I've got most of the volunteers that you probably haven't chosen. They're just there. You inherited them, or they just volunteered for the role and they're doing it. I just want to encourage us sometimes to invest in fewer people. And now that sounds awful. It sounds like very selective and favoritism. But I do believe that as we invest in a small number of people, it's effective. And we know this principle, the 80-20 principle, that actually investing in a small group of people who then can invest in others. Rather than feeling overwhelmed at having 40 people that we want to invest in, why not choose 3 or 4? And I do this. I invest in our team leaders most heavily. And I pass on to them the 2 Timothy 2 principle of passing on to them. And then in turn, they pass on to their team. So what I model, not just what I teach, but what I model, the way that we meet, the way that we debrief, the way that I train, the way that I connect with them personally, I'm modeling that so that they can then in turn model it to others. And actually, that is incredibly effective. Finding those leader volunteers, enablers of others, disciples who make disciples is an effective way. It's not just a pragmatic way. I do truly believe it's a biblical and wise way of leading volunteers. It means that we don't lower the bar. It means that we are very careful about who we select into those leader volunteer positions. And there are different levels, aren't there? So sometimes we may say someone can serve the coffee in churches, but actually someone who's leading worship, they're both volunteer positions, but they're very different. So we may have different ways of selecting and looking after people in different roles. So investing in people, both informally, most of it's relational, I think, these days on Zoom, but also formal opportunities. And we set up formal gatherings, leader clusters, where we get people together. We have reviews, we do external training, and so on. So those are my seven things that I've learned. I've put some resources here. We'll paste those in the chat. They are on the PowerPoint if you want to look through any of the other resources that I've been using.